The Halifax Explosion, which occurred on the 6th of December 1917, where the Belgian relief ship Emo and the French munitions ship Mont Blanc collided in the narrows of Halifax Harbour. Shortly after 9 a.m. in the morning, the ensuing conflagration was the largest man-made explosion prior to the dropping of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima in 1945. Just to give you an idea, it was equivalent to over 5,000 tons of TNT that was touched off. The center of the explosion, the temperature was somewhere near 5,000 degrees Celsius. The blast wave created a tidal wave in the harbor that was some 16 feet high by the time it reached the shores, and that added to the devastation of the damage that was done by the explosion itself. The city of Halifax had a population of approximately 50,000 in 1917, and of that number, 2,000 were killed by the explosion, 9,000 were wounded, and some 22,000 people were left either homeless or with homes that were uninhabitable for some time after the explosion occurred. So greater than 50% of the population of the city was directly and devastatingly affected by the explosion. And of course, after the explosion, there was a number of fires. The police and the fire brigades and so on could not handle the emergency that they were faced with. They did their best. So if it weren't for the garrison troops in Halifax, the 63rd Regiment Halifax Rifles, the 66th Regiment Princess Louise Fusiliers, and the garrison artillery, they would have had a far greater difficulty in recovering from the explosion and in looking after the sheer numbers of people that were homeless and injured. The medical services were run by the head of the Army Medical Services here in Halifax. The logistics were all taken care of by Colonel W.E. Thompson, who was part of the number 6 district headquarters right here in Halifax, which was the main headquarters that looked after Eastern Canada. The day after the explosion occurred, there was a major snowstorm, the biggest one that had occurred in recent times at that time in Halifax, and blanketed the city with snow. There were still people who were trapped in buildings. There were still dead bodies to be recovered. And so those soldiers, in addition to providing food and shelter and helping the police with their security and the fire services with putting out fires, were involved for weeks afterwards in recovering the dead from the devastation of the north end of the city. In fact, many of the soldiers who were involved in doing that kind of thing here in the garrison in Halifax were tremendously affected by those experiences, as much as the soldiers were who faced the enemy in Flanders.
And it shows the same devastation that you found in Flanders fields after the war, because basically Halifax got so completely destroyed with so many lives lost. For me, it made it all the more tangible, the Halifax history. I knew Halifax had that pivotal role. It was the gateway to Europe. It was the first time that Canada really entered into an international conflict. It was almost the first time that Canada as a nation stood up and fought for its principles, and it shows really well in your national anthem, where you stand guard. And this is one of the things that Halifax, with its rich history that is so well maintained, keeps on showing how, as a nation, this was really the center of where your Canadian history started when it came to World War I and II.
And if it weren't for the relief that came from cities like Boston and New York and up in New Brunswick and other provinces in Canada, it would have taken a longer time for Halifax to actually recover. But having said all that, even though the explosion devastated virtually half of the city in terms of its buildings and infrastructure and waterfront, very, very quickly thereafter, Halifax again took up its role as the major Allied seaport on the east coast of North America and continued to send troops and supplies over to Europe.